Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us at our webinar today to discuss how to encourage children to lead their own learning. We have a very exciting webinar for you today. As always, as you join us today and get settled in, go ahead and post in the chat and let us know where you are joining us from today. Let us know, is this your first time joining us? Have you been at our webinars before? Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Summer. Whitney, thank you for being here with us. Welcome. Happy Thursday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on how to encourage children to lead their own learning. I'm so excited. We have a huge group of educators joining us today, so go ahead and put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. Say hello. I'm super happy to be back with you all. I've missed our past two webinars, and you had my lovely colleague Kaya hosting for you the past 2 weeks while I was off hiking in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, which was beautiful. If any of you are from New Hampshire, if you've gone hiking in the White Mountains, let me know because I had an amazing time. Welcome. Welcome. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for joining us. Hi, everybody. The number is ticking up. So many of you are joining us today. I hope everyone is having a sunny Thursday. We have some sun here in Toronto right now, but I think there's a bit of a storm coming. Welcome. Hi, Judy. Hi, Carmen. Thank you for joining us today. 4 a.m, Carmen. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think I could be up at 4 a.m. Welcome, everybody. If you are just joining us, thank you for joining our webinar today on how to encourage children to lead their own learning. Very exciting webinar lined up for you. I know we were going to have an absolutely amazing hour together. We will get started right at 2 o'clock Eastern time on the dot so we can maximize our full hour together. As always, for all of you joining us live here today, please know that you will all be receiving a certificate of participation for being here with us today. Don't worry though, if you don't see that today or maybe not even tomorrow, I promise we will get those out to you by early next week. As well as we go through today's webinar, please be sure to utilize our Q&A chat. If we have time for some questions at the end, we want to make sure you get those all in so you can start posting your questions right away at the start of the webinar. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Marina. Hi, Lauren. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope everyone is having a great Thursday. I just saw a quick question in there about the certificates. They do get sent to your email. So just keep an eye out there early next week. Oftentimes, the certificate can end up in your spam or junk folder as well. So do be sure to just check there if you don't see it. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you for joining us. If you are just joining us, welcome. Happy Thursday. We are going to get started in 2 minutes. As always, I just want to give everyone a minute to find a nice quiet spot, whether you're at home, maybe you're at your childcare center, maybe you're in a classroom and it's nap time. Thank you so much for being here with us today to learn more about how to encourage children to lead their own learning. Welcome, Jennifer, Samantha, Katie. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to wait 1 more minute. I want to make sure everybody who registered has a minute to settle in, find a quiet space if there is one. I know those are hard to come by in early learning. Grab a water, grab your tea, and we'll get started very soon. If you're just joining, go ahead and let us know where you're joining us from in the chat today. Welcome, everybody. It's so amazing to see everybody from all over coming together today to spend some time learning. all the children and families you work with are very lucky to have all of you that are here today, taking the time to learn more about how to encourage children to lead their own learning. Welcome all. For those of you who have never met me before, maybe this is your first webinar. My name is Maddie. I will be the host of today's webinar, and I'm also a customer advocacy specialist here at Hi Mama. So if you are part of the Hi Mama family, that means that I just get the awesome opportunity to get to chat with you and learn about your experience as an educator. I know I've seen some of our amazing members of the Hi Mama family in the chat here already, so welcome to all of you. Okay, it is officially 2 on the dot. So I'm going to go ahead and pause our music. Never as nice of a slow fade as I want that to be. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Again, happy Thursday. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today to learn more about how to encourage children to lead their own learning. Before we get started, I do just want to announce a very exciting giveaway. All members of today's webinar are automatically entered for a chance to win an all-access pass to Teacher Tom's Play Summit this summer, 2022 Summit. Very, very, very exciting. Keep an eye out for our show notes email, again, early next week. And we will be announcing the winner in that email. And if you are the winner, we will also be contacting you directly. So don't worry about reaching out to us. We will be sure to get a hold of you so you don't miss out on this super exciting opportunity. As well as always, before we get started, we do just want to say a quick disclaimer that the information we are sharing with all of you today is not personalized legal or financial advice for your center. So the goal today is for all of us to learn some great tips, tricks, and techniques and be part of a community to bring those tricks and tips back into our classroom, into our homes, wherever that may be. But if you are looking at making any big changes at your center, we do just want to make sure that you're consulting the right people, such as a legal or a financial advisor. And we are just going to do a quick land acknowledgement before we get started.
Hi Mama acknowledges that our main headquarters is situated in Toronto, Ontario, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto itself is a word that originates from the Mohawk word takaranto, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing. As participants and guests in today's webinar, we are coming together from many different places around the world. We encourage you to learn about and acknowledge the land from which you participate.
And we're now going to give a listen to our diversity and inclusion statement.
Hi Mama is committed to fostering an inclusive and welcoming environment for our employees, customers, and community. Hi Mama welcomes and celebrates individuals of all backgrounds, orientations, and identities. Our Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee aims to ensure we provide a safe environment for everyone to thrive while bringing their authentic selves to work. Our mission is to promote an inclusive workspace for all employees through education, discussion, and celebration of our differences. Embracing these differences while coming together with a common purpose is what makes our team extra special.
And a few housekeeping pieces before we get started. So as always, today's session is being recorded. So if for any reason at all you do have to pop off, we certainly hope you don't have to, but if you do not worry. This is being recorded and we will send out the recording again in our show notes email by early next week. We are also recording with the closed captions enabled. So that is on for you in the recording. If you do require the CC tab on during today's live webinar, please be sure to hit that CC button on your side of the computer so you can use those today. Again, in regards to our certificate. So everybody here today at our live webinar will be receiving a certificate of participation. We will be sending those out to you by early next week in your email. Be sure to check your spam and junk email as well. They do go in there sometimes. But if you don't see your certificate tomorrow, do not worry. We will be getting those out to you by early next week. And lastly, if you're having any issues at all with your Zoom, we certainly hope you don't. But if you do have any issues with your Zoom, we just want to make sure you're contacting the right people who know their product the best, which would be the support team at Zoom. And you can reach them at support.zoom.us. Lena has also posted a link in the chat for you there if you do need to contact them. And finally, a little bit about Hi Mama. Did you know that on top of Hi Mama's professional development community with our weekly webinars and our podcast, we are also the #1 rated childcare management app. So if you didn't know that, Hi Mama is also an app designed to support centers in streamlining all of your administrative tasks, all of your parent communication, your photo sharing, your video sharing, your attendance. It's all built into Hi Mama for you to make your lives as easy as possible so that you can really focus on what matters most, which is, of course, the children. If you would like to learn a little bit more about Hi Mama, take a tour, see if it would support you at your center. Lena has posted a link in the chat and you can learn a little bit more about Hi Mama. And lastly, if you do join the Hi Mama family, I can absolutely promise you, you will receive world-class support. I used to work over on our customer success team, and I can say from firsthand experience, if you join Hi Mama, you will be working with some of the best humans I know who are waiting to support you in making this change at your center. As well, if you didn't know, on top of our weekly webinars, we do also have podcasts available on a weekly basis as well. So I highly recommend you check those out. You can listen to them on the go. We also release articles by experts in the industry. And we are also a B certified company. So what that means is that as we work with our amazing community of educators, we are actively working to make a positive impact in the early childhood education space. Okay, and before we get started, your hosts, again, if you've never met me before, if this is your first webinar with us, my name is Maddie. I am the host of our Hi Mama Helps webinar series and our customer advocacy specialist here at Hi Mama. I'm also one of the early childhood educators here on the team. And as always, I have my lovely co-host, Lena, here with me today. Lena, welcome. How's everything going with you today? Anything exciting to share?
Hi, everyone. Honestly, this weekend, I think I'm going to try to go out for a walk. I think it is sunny where I am. And there's actually some free concerts happening in the park. So I think I'm going to go see that.
Amazing. That sounds like a great weekend. Thanks, Lena. Okay, and finally, last but absolutely not least, our amazing guest today. We have Teacher Tom joining us from Teacher Tom's World to discuss how to encourage children to lead their own learning. Tom, welcome. Please feel free to go mic on, camera on. We're so excited to have you here today. How's it going today, Tom?
It's going great, Maddie. Thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to you. I'm grateful to Hi Mama and grateful to all these people who are here taking part.
Oh, amazing. Well, we feel so grateful. I'm so excited about today's webinar. Tom, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go ahead and pass the stage over to you, and I'll be here if you need me.
Great. Thanks, Maddie. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm super grateful for the disclaimer that Maddie read to you, because there are some things I'm going to talk about today that, you know, you're going to want to check with somebody before you do them, because there have been people who've told me that some of the things I talk about make them nervous and that kind of stuff. And that's okay, because we all are experts in our own place. I'll talk about what I do and what my experiences is. And what I invite you to do is just kind of reflect on what I say, see how it fits with what you do, see how it fits with your experiences in the world. Because after all, you know, what all of us are about is learning, right? And there's nothing to distinguish. Learning and thinking are the same thing. So spending time thinking of things, even if you ultimately reject them and decide to do something different, that's also learning. So anyway, just a little statement of fact there. Now, the topic here is how to encourage children to lead their own learning. So for those of you who are super busy, I've decided that, you know, I've probably got 2 days worth of material on this topic. So I only get less than an hour right now. So I'm just going to give you the core of what I'm going to talk about right now. You don't even have to take a note, because I think you'll remember it. And anybody who knows me or has heard me speak before knows exactly what I'm going to say. How to encourage children to lead their own learning is to let them play. It's as simple as that, right? It's a little bit like you ask Warren Buffett about, how to invest in the stock market, and he says, well, buy low and sell high, right? Not necessarily useful, but that's what I'm going to be talking about here. I'm going to be spending some time talking about letting children play. And I want to emphasize that word letting, because children in our world don't have a lot of autonomy. They don't have a lot of, sometimes we call it freedom, but I prefer the word autonomy because freedom can mean a lot of different things. But autonomy, the ability to make their own decisions. There's research that tells us that something like 80% of the sentences that adults say to children are commands. So they're being told what to do all day long. Again, they don't have a ton of autonomy. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Peter Gray, a researcher and the author of a book I'm going to recommend right now, and do write this one down, called Free to Learn. To me, he really encapsulates all the whys and wherefores of play-based learning and why it's so powerful and why it really does put children in charge of their own learning. But in that, he wrote an article recently in Psychology Today. And in that article, he talks about some research that has just been done where, people, we keep talking about, well, what is play? What is play? What are the definitions of play? Dr. Peter Gray, by the way, Stacy, I saw your comment there. Peter Gray from Boston, University of Boston, or retired now. But anyway, one of the things in this study is what he found out is they took these photographs and they said, well, let's find out what play is. And who should we ask? Who are the experts, right? Kids. So let's ask children what play is. And so they had all these photographs that they were showing to groups of children, photographs of children doing all kinds of things, building with blocks or playing in the mud or running outside. Some of them were kids reading books. Some of them were kids sitting down with pen and paper and appeared to be filling out worksheets. All of the kinds of activities you might imagine children doing. And after they surveyed the children, what they found is the common element, the most significant common element between which pictures children said that's play and that's not play, was it was play when there were no adults in the picture. Think about that for a second. Children, that's how sharp they are, is they had the idea that when there was an adult present, that means the kids weren't playing in those pictures. That meant that the adult was somehow directing them. And no wonder, right? Because 80% of the time when adults are present, they're telling the kids what to do. They're telling them to sit down, to do this, to do that. What a way to live, right? So what I'm hoping to do today is talk to you a little bit about what conditions exist, how play really looks, not just to children, but to all of us, and what play is all about. And why it's so important and why it unlocks children's learning. At a way that, because what it does ultimately, what play ultimately does is it relies on the most powerful learning instinct there is. Some people call it a learning emotion. I call it the learning instinct, but whatever you call it, that's what play is. That's what curiosity is. Curiosity is what drives us. Curiosity is what we as a species have evolved. In fact, most species have evolved curiosity as their primary education emotion or education instinct. And I'm going to say, going back to that article, that Psychology Today article, I'm going to go back to, the key finding there is that from the point of view of children and from the point of view of those of us who are play-based educators, the number one criteria for defining something as play is that play must be a self-selected activity, meaning the children choose it themselves. When a child comes into your room, they see blocks and they start building with it, that would be defined as play. If they come in the room and an adult says to them, now it's your time to play with blocks, that suddenly makes it not play. It may be playful, but suddenly we lose the power of curiosity because the child now is doing something that someone is asking them, telling them to do. So it's a self-selected activity. So it was one of this, and I really had an epiphany about this. Really, I think this might have been my first year teaching, one of my first years as an educator. And there was one boy in the classroom, and he had managed to have, we made this pre-COVID, right? We made these big balls of Play-Doh, and the kids would share them, and this boy happened to have the whole ball of Play-Doh to himself, and he wasn't hoarding it. There was no other kids around it, just a quirk of the classroom dynamics. He was there, and he had the whole thing, and he was just kneading it, right? He was just squishing that Play-Doh. And he was sort of, you could see he was almost in a meditative state while his hands were just squeezing into the stuff. I mean, we've all had that sensory experience, right? And while he was doing this, he even was like getting his belly up on it a little bit and rubbing his bare belly on the Play-Doh. So he was just really enjoying this stuff. And I thought to myself, boy, there's a kid over there that's really engrossed in what they're doing. I don't want to interfere. So I went over and I sat beside him. And I sometimes, though, I like to make what I call I wonder statements, right? That little statements where I'm talking about what I'm wondering about, just kind of as a loose part for the children, right? A language loose part, something I'm dropping in there. While he was there squishing that Play-Doh, didn't acknowledge him, didn't say hi or anything, just sat down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. And I said, I wonder what play is. And I just set it to the ceiling. He just kept squishing that Play-Doh, right? He just kept squishing. He didn't say anything. He didn't answer me. Now, this is what the great thing about I wonder statement is. It wasn't a question. So I wasn't, putting an onus on him to answer me. And it certainly wasn't a command. It was just sort of a loose part that I drifted out there and he could pick it up or use it if he wanted to. And, it was pretty clear. He kept squishing that Play-Doh for, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. He didn't respond, and that's okay, right? I was starting to think, okay, well, he's not, it wasn't interesting enough to him to reply to. He just kept going with that Play-Doh. And I waited 3-4 minutes. Finally, I had forgotten all about it. I was just sitting there beside him, watching the rest of the room, and saw something going on in the corner of the classroom. And I got up and I started walking over there. To deal with it. And as I'm walking away, he stopped me. He said, Teacher Tom, play is what I do when people aren't telling me what to do. Bam, right? Just blows your mind. Even when I say this now, I've told this story a million times now, and every time I tell it, I get a shiver down my spine because that boy, he had nailed it. This boy really understood what play was all about. It was about that self-selected activity. But that's not the only thing that goes into play. We know that play exists when things are open-ended. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in school settings is making play be an open-ended activity. When play is really happening, there is no beginning, middle, or end to it. A lot of educators use the word, and if you talk to play-based educators and they talk about a good day, usually what the word they use is flow, right? It flowed. And so most of you have probably used that term before. How was today? Oh man, it just flowed. It just went from one thing to the next. The kids started off, they were in the block area and they were building something, and then they had to go to the art area and they created signs or something, and then they went and got the costumes on, and then they were back and then they took it outside, and these kids joined the play and these kids left the play. And at the end of the day, you don't know where the time went. It just flowed from one thing to the next. And I think that's one of the big challenges we have, right? Because most of us, or a lot of us, have schedules. And I think that's one of the challenges we have in letting children be in charge of their own learning, is that we often don't give them enough time in our days, right? I mean, the research is clear that children need a minimum of 45 minutes to an hour in order to become fully engaged in an activity. And for me, it needs to be 2-3 hours so they can get fully immersed in some kind of activity. And so many of our schedules are broken up into half-hour increments. I've been to early childhood settings where the schedules are broken up into even sometimes it's 15-minute increments. And that doesn't give children enough time to get fully immersed in what they're doing. It doesn't give them a chance to activate that curiosity. It just means they're being moved from one thing to the next. It's very much like an assembly line when that happens. And the children themselves, again, it may be playful and many of them may be able to manage it and handle it and they're good at it. That doesn't mean that it's play, and it doesn't mean that they're in charge of their own learning. There was another person I'm going to recommend that you take a look at her book. It's more in the lines of parenting, but it's also really valuable work for us. A clinical psychologist by the name of Alison Gopnik. Many of you probably have heard of her. She's written several books and she's got lots of videos on the internet. Alison Gopnik. I believe she was at Berkeley. She was at one of the California universities. And at one point they conducted a study looking at this concept of open-endedness and the power of open-ended. What does it mean? What does it do for children? And as part of this experiment, what they did is they invented a toy. And this was a toy that had never been seen on the face of the planet. They invented it, had, I think, 7 or 8 functions built into it. There was a dial and a door and a bell you rang, and all kinds. There was a part that you pulled and it made it squeak. And so when the first group of children who they were introducing this toy to them, what they did is they introduced and they said, look, here's a toy. And they made it squeak, 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 right? Showing them one of the functions of the toy. And then they turned it over to the children. And in this group of children, every single one of the children made the toy squeak. Some of them just once or twice, right? That's all they were interested in. Some of them, as you know, any squeaky toy, did it a whole bunch of times until it starts to drive you crazy, right? Each one of them engaged with that squeakiness the way they wanted to. But then, and this really surprised the researchers, for the most part, most of the children then were done with the toy. They set it aside and they wanted to do something else. Now, as experienced educators, every single one of you know what happened with the next phase of this experiment, right? They handed the toy over to the children without the demonstration. This group of children, they all made it squeak. This group of children discovered all of the features that were built into the toy. They played with all 7 or 8 features of this toy. They played with it longer and with greater interest. And many of the kids found things to do with the toy that weren't built into it. Their creativity, their curiosity was activated. And I think this is an important point, because what we see is the danger of this, the risk of direct instruction, right? When you show them what to do, it has the effect of putting blinders on children. And suddenly now they're only looking at what the adult is showing them, rather than the experience of the full world, which is really where play takes place, in this open-ended environment, where you're free to choose and pick and choose from whatever part of the environment you're choosing from. I mean, because after all, isn't that what play is? Play is the way the human animal, all animals for that matter, the human animal answers its own questions. It's how we satisfy our curiosity. Now, when you tell people, when you're outside of our bubble here, right? We're here in a little preschool world bubble right now, this one created by Hi Mama. It's a wonderful little bubble to be in. But when you're outside of that bubble, you're at a dinner party or something, and somebody asks you, what do you do? What's your profession? And you say you're a teacher. I would say most people have the stereotype. One of the things they imagine you spend a good part of your day doing is posing questions, and then the children will raise their hands, and then you call on them and you tell them if they're right or if they're wrong. In a play-based curriculum, when play is at the core, when we are engaging children in their own learning, the children are there to ask and answer their own questions. That is the process of play. And when you watch children at play, that is what they are doing. There is always a question behind what they are doing. You might not be able to tell what it is, but you can guess. And sometimes you know very clearly what it is. The children themselves, especially younger children, if you ask them, well, what question are you trying to answer? They're just going to, look at you like you're crazy, right? They may not have thought of it that way, but there is always a question. Can I build this block tower one higher, right? Can I draw a picture? Is it possible for me to draw a picture of my mom? Right? Can I climb up this tree? Is it possible? There's a question behind that. And then they set about answering that question. Sometimes, it causes our hearts to go in our throat when they do that. But that's what the children are doing. If you watch your children in your space, you'll see them constantly asking and answering their own questions. I'll never forget this one little boy named Henry, who I taught several years ago. And he was, his father's a big burly guy. So he obviously was sort of instinctively preparing for his future as a big burly guy, because one of the things he loved to do more than anything else was pick up and carry around big, heavy things, or push big, heavy things. He was always moving the tables in the classroom with the chairs, or outside he was finding big stumps that he could roll around, or, car tires, because our playground's one of those. I'll talk about that in a minute, where there are spare car tires and things on it. He was always doing things to use his body strength. And one of the things that we had on the playground at this time were these traffic cylinders. So they're not the cones, but they're like these cylinders with a weighted base. You'll see them on, construction sites on the freeway or something like that, sort of a, stanchion, maybe they're called. I can't remember what the names are. But they had this, we had this on the playground, and I saw Henry was carrying it on one shoulder. And I see him walking across the playground. He's got this thing on his shoulder and he's walking along, and I'm just observing, right? Because I feel like that's one of the main functions of a teacher, the main roles that we have in an environment where play is at the center, is to be researchers ourselves, to observe. And so I'm watching him. I'm trying to think, what is Henry doing over there? And he's carrying this along. And then he put it down on the ground and he arranged it in a certain way. He was arranging it. There was something going on there. I knew something was going on. And I didn't get close because I didn't want to go in there and impact what he was doing. I stayed, kept my distance. And then he climbed up on this big wooden crate that was right beside it. And he jumped off and crack, he broke it. He broke this traffic cylinder. And I'm just, I said, Henry, what'd you do that for? I called out from across the playground. What'd you do that for? And he hollered back, I wanted to see if I could break it. Duh, right? He had set up his experiment. He had a question, set up his experiment, and answered his question. Now, I know some of you are thinking, did I have a talk with him about property and things like that? And actually, at the time I did. Although I will say that we have what we call a junkyard playground. And this is an aside. A junkyard playground, which basically means almost everything out there already is broken. So in some regards, that's their space. And so I didn't. So anyway, at the time, though, this was many years ago, I did have a conversation about breaking things. But the truth is that to me is an incredible example of a child asking and answering his own question. And I want to say this isn't just about the physical world, right? This asking and answering their own questions through play also comes up in their social interactions, right? In their social life. Any of you who teach 2-year-olds, you know that the 2-year-old, if one of the questions they have is, what happens when I push her nose? She cries. Or then what happens if I push her nose? She cried. What if I push his nose? He cried too. And sometimes they got to push all the noses, right? I taught one little boy named Ernesto many years ago, and we had actually enrolled him a little bit early. He'd had a sibling in there, and we wanted to let him in a little early. So this was a kid who wasn't even 2 yet, and he wasn't speaking very much, and he was a 2-year-old. And one of the questions he seemed to have is whenever a child was sitting on the ground, his question seemed to be, what happens if I go and start hitting them on top of the head? Well, of course, they'd cry. And he'd look at him, he'd be curious, and he'd go on, he'd hit somebody else on the head, and they'd cry, and he'd go. And so, we would catch up with him, right? The way you do as an educator, and you hold his hand, and you say, I can't let you hit people. And when you hit people, it hurts them. Trying to give him, draw the connection between his behavior and the injury he was causing others. But he was a little young for this. He wasn't making the connection. It was clear to us he didn't make the connection. So, what we could do was essentially assign an adult on Ernesto duty each morning. So each morning as Ernesto would come in, I would assign one of the adults in the room. I'd say, all right, your job is to keep an eye on Ernesto today. But, he's not even 2, right? You can't keep track of a kid all day long. So, there was one day in this process there, he's over there, leaving his trail of tears, hitting this kid, hitting that kid. And I'm on my way over there. Before I got over to him, he got to this boy named Anthony. And he started hitting Anthony on the head. But instead of crying, this time Anthony just smiled and he looked up at Ernesto. And then he stood up and started hitting Ernesto on the head. Ernesto's hitting him on the head. And there they were. Ernesto had found his people. He got the answer to the question he was looking for through those social interactions. And they're messy, those social interactions. It can be ugly, but without that opportunity to ask and answer his own questions, he never, and what was beautiful about that is those boys, they stayed friends, and 2-year-olds, don't often form those kind of one-on-one friendships like that. And it was just beautiful to watch these 2 boys in their friendship. Because what play is at bottom, play is indistinguishable from science, from trial and error science. It wasn't Einstein. It was Einstein's biographer who said this. He said, play is the highest form of research. And we see this all the time around our classrooms. Yeah, think about it. I mean, if you find yourself, again, I talked about when we're outside of our bubble and you're meeting people and somebody tells you they're a scientist, try this experiment. Get them in a one-on-one conversation and start getting curious about their work. Start asking them questions, about what they're up to. And, once they get through their complaints about bureaucracy and funding and all the stuff we all complain about all the time, every time, once you get them talking about their work itself, you see their eyes light up and they always start using the word play, right? We were playing around with the variables and what we figured out was, or we played around with the data and what we seemed to find. And you see them light up and get excited about that because that's what they're doing. Play is science. Now, I mentioned before the things that make our hearts go into our throats, right? And that's so in the category of what we often call risky play, right? And that's something that a lot of you are thinking about. And this might be the area where I might talk about something that, you want to check with your licensor, you want to check with your insurance company or whoever you need to deal with before doing some of this stuff. I was in this great environment for more than 20 years where we were able to engage in a lot of risky play. And it's impossible to talk about play without talking about risk. Children need risk for their prefrontal cortex to develop properly. It's absolutely essential for them learning how to keep themselves safe. And it can't be artificial risk. It can't be pretend risk. It's not the same thing. The brain knows the difference between a real risk, excuse me, and a pretend risk. Or where they're standing on a 2-foot high thing and you're saying to them, oh, you're so brave, you're so brave. Some of the kids, they are. A lot of the kids, man, they want to be up. They want to be 10 feet up in the air. Now, I'm not saying you let them do it. I'm saying that's what their curiosity is going to drive them to do. And risky play is essential. So that's why in our space at Woodland Park, we always accommodated. We gave children the chance to engage in the risky play. And I want to distinguish between hazards and risks. A hazard would be, say, shards of broken glass on the playground. Our school was an urban school, and that's one of the hazards of urban schools is sometimes you get shards of broken glass on the playground. Those you want to pick up, right? A rusty nail sticking out at eye level. Yeah, you want to get rid of that. Those are hazards where somebody might accidentally hurt themselves. But a risk is something the child chooses for themselves. A risk is something where the child makes a decision, I want to try that. I'll give you an example. We have these concrete slopes on our playground. We have one big one, and then there's a smaller one that were put there generations ago for erosion control. And there was one boy, I was walking by the smaller slope, and there he was sitting at the top of it on one of our Tonka trucks, the dump truck. I knew exactly what he was contemplating, right? He was thinking about going down that hill. Now, it wasn't very long, but it was a steep hill. And I figured he would fall. He would probably end up falling it off the truck when he went down. That was my estimate. That's what I thought. But what made it particularly alarming to me is that we had, stupidly, as it turns out, built a planter box, right? For our playground garden. We built a planter box pretty close to the bottom of that. And the first thing my thought was, what he's going to do is he's going to go down the hill. He's going to run into that planter box. Boom. He's going to go head over heels, flying through the air, possibly getting hurt. Now, I don't see it as my role to prevent children from engaging in the risks that they're choosing for themselves, unless I'm absolutely certain they're going to be hurt. So instead of going and commanding the child, telling the child, don't do that, or even the command, be careful, which a lot of us use. What I said to this boy, and this is a boy I'd known, so, I felt pretty safe in saying this. I said to him, I'm going to be here and watch you so that when you get hurt, I can take care of you. And he looked at me and he said, well, Teacher Tom, I'm not going to get hurt. I said, oh, well, I guess I'm just worried you're going to go down the hill, you're going to run into the planter, and you're going to go flying over head over heel and get hurt. And so I'll be here to take care of you. I said, I'm not going to get hurt. So I said, okay, well, I'll just be here. And I stood there watching him, and he stood and he was thinking, and I feel pretty confident that my loose part, again, a loose part of language that I'd put out there, that was part of his thought process. Now, suddenly I knew the part that concerned me was in his head, that he was thinking about. He'd already been thinking about, whatever he was thinking about. Now I'd added this to his risk assessment. And finally, he bombed down that hill, and he stopped himself that close to the planter box. And he looked at me with such a smug look. He said, see, I didn't get hurt. But see, this is the kind of thing that children need to do and the kind of accommodations we need to make for it. Now, I know that, again, we at our playground, we do things like we have a full workbench, we have hammers and nails and saws, we even have some power tools that the kids use. We put on the eye protection, but, for the most part, the kids are out there building with tools and things like that. And hot glue guns we'll have out there, even the 2-year-olds, right? We'll be out there with hot glue guns. And people always ask me, well, don't the 2-year-olds, hit their thumb when they're using the hammer? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. Everybody hits their thumb when they're learning to use a hammer. I don't care what age you are. I mean, I just turned 60 years old. If I picked up a hammer for the first time today to use it, I guarantee I would hit my thumb, because that's part of the process of using to learn a hammer. And the difference is that, at 60 years old, my bones are way more brittle than a 2-year-old's bones. So I'm much more likely to do myself serious damage. Don't the 2-year-olds burn themselves on the hot glue gun? Yes, they do. They do. Everybody burns themselves on the hot glue. Not only that, I use hot glue guns on a regular basis, and I burn myself every time I use one. It's part of the process of using a hot glue gun. And think about that. You think, well, why do kids need a hot glue gun? That is one of the most powerful building tools there is. It opens up the whole world. And for us humans, we are, all the animals are using curiosity to educate themselves, but we are one of the few tool using animals. That's one of the characteristics of being a human being. Maybe you've heard the phrase, Abraham Maslow's quote, his other famous quote, which is, if all you have is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. Every tool that a child learns how to use, or that any of us learn how to use, opens up the world a little bit more to us, makes it a little bigger. And when a child is using a hot glue gun, the world becomes enormous, because with those tools, you can build almost anything. You can go in the recycling box and you can build mansions, castles, heliports, whatever you want to build with just a little dot of that glue. And so I watch, sometimes the 2-year-olds, they'll burn their thumb, and they'll cry bloody murder, and we go put it in a bucket of water and cool it down. And many of them, it's like, I'm not going back there again. Yeah, at least for a while. But you should see the 4- and 5-year-olds out there, the experienced kids with, they're out there gluing, and they just shake it off and they go back to work, because that's what they've learned. They've learned how to take that opportunity to engage with risk. Now, here's the other thing that I want to mention is that, and I'm sure everybody in my school was like this too. Every environment I've been in the last, 20 years has at least some toys. And I asked myself, I know why toys have become connected to childhood and childhood play, right? The idea of a toy, because of marketing, right? Because toy manufacturers back in, I think it was the 50s, they suddenly realized they could start advertising toys on television. The first toy advertised on television, just on American television at least, was a toy called the Thunder Burp machine gun. And if you can look up the ad, the old commercial, the black and white commercial, if you want to, on the internet, and it is eye-opening. Because here we have kids out there playing with this machine gun. They're pointing it right at the camera, the kind of thing that would never be allowed on the air today. But from that moment on, suddenly it became the go-to, the thing that we assumed that children would need toys, and they want them, right? We all know they ask for toys, right? They go to the toy store and I want this, I want that, I want that. They see the commercial on TV, they say, I want that. But children do not need toys. Children are much more interested when you watch them when they're free to play, when we let them play. They're almost always far more interested in the real world than they are these artificial things like toys. I'll give you a mental experiment to try out about this. Imagine that you have a toy lawnmower and you put it out on your playground, and then you also have a real lawnmower out there. Which one are the children going to go to? Which one are the children going to engage with? I think most of us know they're going to be all over that real lawnmower, because that's the real world. That's the important part of the world. And if they play with the toy one, if they play with that toy lawnmower, 9 times out of 10, they're going to do like those kids did in Alison Gopnik's experiment. They're going to do something else with it. They're going to say, oh, this is my car, or this is my motorcycle, or this is or whatever it is. They're going to use it for something else. They're going to flip it over and use the wheels and pretend like it's an ice cream maker or something. Because we know that's what children do with toys. Several years ago, we were playing, and our sensory table was set up in the classroom, and it had a rice in it. And any of you have done that, any kind of grain in your sensory table, right? It gets all over the floor, and there's always an adult there sweeping it up. Well, this group of kids, there was a core group of them who really wanted to take part in that. And they were always helping the adult with the real world activity of cleaning up the rice that was on the floor. And right, I'm sitting there going, hey, we should take advantage of this. This is awesome. So I went out and I went to the store and I bought a whole bunch of, child-sized brooms and child-sized dustpans, because I wanted the kids to have something their own size to use. Well, I took those in the class. They didn't want that. They wanted the big broom. They wanted the grown-up broom. They wanted the real dustpan. Children are much more driven by the real world. than they are about those toys. And we all know that. I mean, the classic joke, right? On Christmas morning, right? The kids are so excited, they rip into their packages or their birthday or whatever, gift giving opportunity. And they rip in and they get the toy out and they play with the toy for, an hour. And then they spend the rest of the day playing with the boxes, the ribbons, the bows, the wrapping paper, the real world stuff, because those are the real world things. And we all have had this experience and we know that it's true. Play, and I think this is an important one that we sometimes forget about. Play is how we learn about the connection between failure, perseverance, and success. When children are left to play, when we let them play, when they are directing their own learning, if you really look around, not only do they have questions that they're trying to answer, they also spend a great deal of time failing. In fact, they spend a lot more time failing than succeeding, right? They're working on the puzzle and they're failing until they finally get it right. They're failing at getting the picture. The buildings keep falling down until they figure out exactly how to do that. People often ask about play-based education. They ask, one of the big questions that critics have is, well, how do they learn about hard work? I've never seen anybody work harder than a child at play. I never have. No, hard work is built into play. I'll never forget one time I had this one little girl, her name was Violet, and I was watching her play. She was building with these big cardboard blocks that a lot of us have. And she was just building a straightforward tower, putting one on top of the other with a medium-sized block. And then she got it to a certain height and she wanted to put one of the longer blocks on top. So she put it on top, and of course it was top heavy and the thing fell down. So she just went back to work building her tower. Then she put the long one on top again and it fell down again. And she did it again. And after 4 or 5 times, I started thinking, maybe I should, maybe I could go help her. Maybe I should go support her in this. And I'm always cautious about stepping in. I'm always cautious about my adult intervention because it often takes away their autonomy when I do this. I mean, she hadn't asked me for help, right? I was just as an observer thinking, maybe she could use some help. I've got a tip for her, right? I maybe could have mansplained it to her, which I think a lot of what we do as educators very often is akin to mansplaining. There's a lot of unsolicited advice. But anyway, I was standing back and I was thinking, and finally, she walked away. She just left those blocks on the floor. And I was feeling, like a failure somehow. And I thought to myself, okay, the next time I see her in there, the next time I see her building, I'm going to go ahead and give her a tip. A few days later, there she was. I see her start building the tower. So I'm ready. I'm poised ready. When I saw her get out the long one to put on, I started heading her way. And I got over there and before I could say anything though, she put the long one on, then she put 2 more on top of it to weight it down. There she had her shelf and she put her little ponies on there. I have no idea how she figured that out. And it's none of my business, frankly, because she did. It was through those failures, the perseverance. I like to think she went home and she tried it out with her small blocks at home, or maybe she just thought about it and kind of stewed on it for a while until the thought came there. Maybe her big brother gave her a tip. She had a big brother at home who maybe give her a tip on how to do it. They want to guess what the next thing she did? After she had succeeded and she'd worked, mentally and physically over the course of several days to create this structure. Bet you know what she did next. Bam, she kicked it over. Because that's how meaningless the success was. So often in school, we talk about success. We want everybody to be successful. We want to set everybody up for success. But the truth is that when children have the autonomy to teach themselves to be in charge of their own learning, what we see is that success becomes just another step in the process. It's not something to strive toward. It's only a marker that now I'm done with this. Now I'm ready to go do something else. I want to make sure I mention before I finish up and go to the question and answer part, that I mention a couple of other aspects of play, that these are the parts that maybe are challenging for some of us, and certainly challenging, I think, for some of the parents of the children we teach. Play is messy. When children have I don't want kids to get messy. People used to say that all the time. Oh, Teacher Tom got my kid messy. No way. I didn't want the kids to get messy. I personally tried not to I did get messy, but I tried not to. It was usually like collateral damage when I got messy. Somebody else would get me messy. But that's part of the process for every child sometimes, and for all the children, and all the children sometimes, and some of the children always need to make a mess when they play. They always need to explore the materials at hand. And sometimes that means painting yourself all the way up on the arms. There was one girl I'll never forget. She painted her entire body, her clothing, her hair, everything. We were outdoors doing this. She painted everything on her body. And then she walked around pretending she was going to give people hugs. And it was this big joke. It was this big opportunity for all of us. So this is an important part. So that's why I always tell the parents that when they bring their kids to school, I tell them, expect your child to come home every day, covered in mud, paint, water, snot, right? A little scary during COVID, and blood. I'll mention blood sometimes too, because sometimes coming home with a Band-Aid is part of it. And the last thing I want to mention is another kind of mess. This other kind of mess is that play, if it's real play and the children are autonomously playing, there's going to always be bickering. Bickering is always a key aspect of what they're doing. It's so central to what they're doing. And I know this is when we tend to step in and we think it's going to escalate and we're worried about, but I'm inviting everybody, when you really want to put children in charge of their own learning, it's important that we learn to step back and to give the children a chance for their bickering to produce fruit. Because the bickering is the beginning stages of learning how to negotiate, learning how to get along with other people in the world, learning how to get your own needs met while also making space for others to get their needs met, to coming to agreements with one another. My rule of thumb that I always give, it's a rule of 15s that I like, is that in any new play environment, children, the first 15 minutes, you'll typically see, usually be fairly quiet, right? The children will come in, they start exploring the materials. What can I do with this? What can I do with that? And then after about 15 minutes, that's when they start bumping up against each other, right? Hey, I was using that. No, you knocked down my building. You took that. You've got all of them. I want some of them. You've got the red ones. I want some, right? And they start bickering. And that's when they might need us. And that's where often I'll move myself a little closer to the kids. But what's important is to let it go just a little longer. Of course, we stop fisticuffs, right? We stop it when somebody's hitting or hurting somebody or snatching things from somebody. But 9 times out of 10, when we stay out of it, very often what we find is the children come to, and suddenly they get to the point where they get to that third 15 minutes, which was suddenly the beautiful parts happen. And they start saying, hey, let's build our buildings together. Or why don't we all of us build with the red and the blue? Or how about we all, and they start working together and they create this community, which ultimately is one of the greatest skills any of us can have, is this idea. And that's why, like I said before, children need a minimum of 45 minutes in order to become engaged with something. I was just talking to an educator in public schools who was telling me here in the US or in Seattle, Washington, he was telling me that some of their research shows that some of the kids are only getting about 15 minutes for lunch and 15 minutes for recess a day. That's not even enough time to decide what you're going to do, let alone actually do something. Children need a sweep of time in order to do these things. So I'm here at the end. I want to kind of wrap up right here. But before I turn it over to questions, I want to mention, Maddie talked about my Play Summit that's coming up. And I just want to, I want to invite each of you to register for our upcoming, the Teacher Tom's Play Summit. It's our second time. And I want to tell you, it is free. These, the passes that we're giving away, the 10, these are for the upgrade, right? For the upgrade if you want, lifetime access to all the material. But the summit is free. It's all online. And I want to say it again, it's totally free. It's a 5-day virtual event. It starts on August 13th. And it features interviews with 20 different interviews. There's more educators than that because some of us are in groups. Interviews with early childhood educators and parenting experts and thought leaders from around the world. I'm really proud actually of the people from all places, including Canada, including the US, but also New Zealand and Rwanda and Italy. We've got speakers from all over. We got a speaker from India talking about play from their perspective. And these sessions are going to be informative. Yeah, but I think the goal is to inspire you, because it's been a tough couple of years, right? I mean, it's been tough. And I think we could all use a little inspiration right now. You'll see the link to go get registered. I think it's being posted in the chat and it's on all the slides and everything. Our summit, I just want to say this. Our summit, we had over 20,000 educators and parents participate. And so we'd love to have you join us for this, because it's just a great way to learn from one another. Excuse me. But what I'm proudest of most of all, what I'm most excited about at this summit is that wide net we've cast to bring people in from all kinds of different perspectives. That last year, one of our presenters was a native, actually a Canadian Ojibwe educator from near Toronto. His name was Hopi Martin. And at that summit, he started talking about perspective, the idea of why perspectives, various perspectives is so important. And he was talking about the metaphor of a campfire. And imagine you're sitting around a circle with a bunch of people at the campfire, and you're looking at the fire, and you can tell people what you see. I see that campfire. But you don't know what that campfire really is until you've heard from every single one of the other people sitting around that fire, till everybody shares their perspective. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor for what we're trying to do at the Play Summit. And the thing that I'd like to point out too is, even though you hear from everybody around, we didn't get to hear from the birds in the trees. We didn't get to hear from the trees themselves. We didn't get to hear from the worms underground. There's always a new perspective to add to what we're doing. And that's why learning is so exciting. So anyway, this is what I want to do. You can find the link. So I hope to see you there. So anyway, thank you, everybody. Let's do some Q&A.
Teacher Tom, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I have sticky notes galore over here with questions that I want to get through, and we have questions from the audience. Thank you so much. You are preaching to the choir. I know for most of our audience, for me especially, I loved that so much.
Preaching to the choir is how you get them to sing.
You are right. Really quickly, I'm going to let you catch your breath there. That was a lot of information, a lot of really great stories. So catch your breath, have some water. I am going to quickly share my screen again for everyone on here. And as always, to all of our guests at the webinar today, we have a quick poll for you. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now, and then we will try and get through a couple questions with Teacher Tom before we wrap up. But what we want to know today is, how do you currently observe and document children's play in your classroom and at your center? If maybe you don't formally track it in any specific way, maybe you do this on pen and paper, online documents. Let us know how you currently track play in your classrooms and at your center. We're also curious to know if you're interested in learning about how the Hi Mama app can make documenting play and observations that much easier at your center. Everything you're seeing children play with, from the backgrounds, you can go into Hi Mama and you can document all the play that is happening in the classroom. So go ahead and let us know in the poll if you are interested in learning at all about how Hi Mama can help you with tracking children's play at your center. Last question that you'll see there, again, we are curious to know if you are able to submit your Hi Mama certificates that you get from our webinars to your local licensing boards, organizations, or maybe you just keep them for yourself. Curious to know if these certificates are accepted by your local licensing board. Let us know in the poll there. Okay, I will leave that up for all of you, and we're now going to dive in. Teacher Tom, if you're ready for a couple quick questions before we wrap up for today. First question I want to ask you, and I know you touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to dive back in to risky play and what you were talking about there. And I'm curious to know, I know from experience as someone who very much supports risky play and stepping back and letting children engage in play. And even though I so strongly believe that, it is so hard when you're seeing something happen to not be like, oh my gosh, I need to jump in there. They're going to get hurt. I'm going to have to write this incident report. We had an incident report yesterday. This parent's going to get upset. Do you have any words of wisdom, any tips for kind of even just self-thinking that educators can think in those moments, and how to safely perceive the risk that the child's engaging in?
Well, I think it's important. That's a great question, because that's something we all have to deal with, right? It's a fine line. We all have these definitions, right? None of us want a head injury, right? Yeah. So that's something nobody wants the eyes to get injured. So those are the ones that if you see that happening, you got to step in, right? Because those are not going to heal, although potentially could never heal. But then you get to broken bones. Well, broken bones, you don't want it to happen, but almost every kid eventually breaks a bone at some point. But I'm going to say we're trying to stop broken bones too, most of us. But then you get to the scrapes and the bruises And you get down to that kind of stuff. So I think the first thing to do, in my view, is really ask yourself what's real here. What is the real potential? What am I really afraid of here?
Mhm.
And so if it is one of the higher level ones, you do want to step in, right? Get in there and say something. And for me, instead of saying, be careful, which is a meaningless statement, right? I'm sure we've all said it. I mean, I say it all the time, be careful. I say it to my spouse. I say it to people all the time, be careful. Be careful is sort of a meaningless statement because the truth is the kids are already being careful, right? They're already being careful. It's just, so what I advise people, what I try to do is instead of coming in and saying, be careful, I like to come in and I like to make specific statements about what I see. Like I mentioned with that boy, I like to tell them what I see as a hazard. So if you fall from there, there's concrete below you, it will hurt, right? And so that way I'm giving some real information for them to use, a real fact, so they can think to themselves, oh yeah, that would hurt. And maybe they'll decide to climb back down, or maybe they'll decide, I'm going to hold on a little tighter. But whatever the case is, we know we've put it in their head. What I call that is using informative statements. Inform them about what you see. I see a pokey bit right by your eye, and I'm worried it's going to hurt you. If you hold on with two hands, you'll be less likely to fall. These kinds of things to give the children information that lets them do their own risk assessment. That doesn't mean you don't get closer. That doesn't mean you don't make sure your hands are out of your pockets, because you're still ready to catch them if they do fall. But what it means is that you're showing that you trust them to think for themselves.
Absolutely. Which leads me then into kind of a follow-up question. Because we know that letting children make their own decisions and engage in risky play is one of the most important ways for them to learn about their own skills and learn to trust their body as they grow. And I think one of the most important things we have to do then in a childcare center that is full of parents with different beliefs and full of licensing and regulations and rules, how do you handle conversations, or really what I'm getting at, I guess, is tips for educators on how they can communicate the value of what they're doing by encouraging risky play to parents?
Start before the kids have ever crossed your threshold. I really value, we always would have a parent orientation meeting, and I encourage everybody to do that, because parents might not show up all the time, but they can show up to one meeting before their kids are enrolled. And even if they can't, do a Zoom meeting or at least make sure it's, and I tell them right away, like I said before, I try to manage that expectation by explaining your child will have the opportunity to get a few bumps and bruises. We call them learning owies, right? And I tell them, like I said before, I will say to them, expect your child to come home every day covered in paint and mud and water and snot. And when I say blood, they always laugh nervously. Because they're right at that moment where it's like, it hasn't happened yet. So they haven't, they're not mad at me. They're not mad at us, and they're thinking about it. And I want them to know though, and what you find is what that does is that the parents, then they'll show up to pick up their kid, and they look at him, they go, I see some paint. All right, that's okay. Oh, I see some mud today. And then every once in a while they come in and they say, oh, well, I guess when the Band-Aid's on there, they go, oh, it's my turn. And the other thing that I guess I would share, and I don't know if this really answers your question, but I really want people to hear this. There hasn't been a lot of research on playground safety. Your insurance company's brochure that they give you about playground safety is based on a group of parents in Chicago from the 1980s who just came up with their best guesses. There's not been a lot of research. There's the best comparison we have between like an adventure playground and a traditional out-of-the-box playground is a school down in Texas. I wish I could remember where. I think it's in Houston, where they have an adventure playground on one side of the school, and they have a traditional out-of-the-box playground on the other side. And their injury rates are higher on the traditional playground. The adventure playground has a lower rate, and their theory is it's because kids look at that and they say, I could get hurt here. And so they take more care of themselves. And I guess when I talk to parents, I talk, the best safety thing we have for your child is for them to learn how to keep themselves safe. And I wish, and I try really hard, I'm never going to win this one. I'm trying to rephrase it. Instead of us talking about risky play, I'd love for us to understand that we're talking about safety play. Because that's really what they're doing, is learning to keep themselves safe. Because saying be careful, preventing them from doing things. I mean, think about this. I'm sorry, I'm answering this long, but this is such an important topic for me. when you get it, like if you build a new you get a new out of the box playground on your climbing structure on your playground. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, the kids, they climb up the ladder, they slide down the slide, they use the poles, they enjoy themselves. And then some of them start climbing on the outside of the railings. And they start trying to climb up on the roof. And that's when you're sitting there, no, you can't do that. Because what's happened is the children have played the risk out of it. And they're trying to add risk back in. They will naturally do this. If the mental experiment, tell a child, don't climb on that wall and turn your back. You know that most kids are going to go climb on that wall. They're at least going to go over there and take a good hard look and think about it. So I think it's really children, they naturally want to put risk in their lives. And that's why, so often as adults, our perspective is, oh, they're all trying to kill themselves. They're not trying to kill themselves. They're trying to keep themselves safe by learning about their world.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that reframing of saying safety play. I think that is really great. And I'm also really glad you touched on playgrounds. I know we are out of time, but that was another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I've done a bit of research on playgrounds as well. And I know that some research I found is that new playgrounds are so pre-designed that it removes the element for children to be able to problem solve and engage in critical thinking. It's kind of like the guided instruction that you're talking about in the classroom. It's created for them. So really interesting. And I'm glad you brought that topic up as well.
Can I just mention one thing? When there was my daughter was little, it was this kooky, crazy playground that was just built on this big pile of asphalt, and some old hippies must have designed it. I don't know what it was. It was one of the local parks, and the kids just loved that place. And the city, that suddenly the neighborhood families raised money to build a new regular playground on it. And I'll never forget showing up there when the new playground was there. And my daughter just looked at it. She was about 5 years old and said, they ruined it. And then I noticed that the kids none of them were playing on the playground. The adults were on the swing. The adults were on the slides, and the kids were over in the trees and the shrubbery around the outside edge. That's because they were looking for genuine risk.
Absolutely. I appreciate that story. I really like that. Well, Teacher Tom, thank you so much. I hope you had some time to look at the chat a little bit, because everybody was absolutely loving the information and the stories you were sharing today. We appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for being here with us today, Teacher Tom.
All right. Well, thank you, Maddie. And thanks. Hi, Mama. And thanks, everybody.
Thanks, pleasure. Bye, Teacher Tom.
Bye.
Everyone on here today, before we wrap up, one last reminder that there will be a giveaway being announced in the show notes email about who is our lucky winner today of the all access pass to Teacher Tom's Play Summit in August. So keep an eye out for that. You do not want to miss that if you are the winner. Lastly, what is next? So show notes, email, and recording will be sent out to you by early next week. And if you haven't registered yet, I know Lena has posted a link in the chat, but next week, same time, same place, Thursday, June 23rd, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be talking about providing quality childcare, 11 rules to live by for childcare centers. It will be an absolutely fabulous webinar. I certainly hope you can all make it. Lastly, if you have not connected with us yet, please do. We have a Circle Time Facebook group with tons of educators in there daily sharing activities and learnings in their classroom. It's a really great community to be in. So please join us in there. I hope to see you. We also have an Instagram page where Kaya, who you all know, shares upcoming webinars and tips and ideas and strategies for your classroom. And lastly, on top of our weekly webinars, we do have our podcasts as well. So definitely go ahead and check those out if you haven't already. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to be here with us today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and see you all next week. Take care, everybody.